Hi guys, and welcome back to the Average Pundits podcast, your home for all things Premier League. We've got a very exciting episode lined up for you today. As always, I'm joined with Reese. How you doing, Reese?
I'm very good. Glad to be back as always, and let's get this. This podcast is going to be an amazing one for sure. I'm a great fan of this guest, so let's get it underway.
There we go, and we are joined by the Liverpool correspondent for the Evening Standard, Mr. David Lynch. How you doing, David?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much. It's nice to be on a new podcast, new faces. Nice to meet you, lads. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Excellent. Yeah, this is one we've been looking forward to for quite a long time. You know, we've had some guests on talking about, you know, kind of overall journalism. We've talked a bit about Manchester United, a bit about Manchester City, but we haven't yet had an in-depth delve into Liverpool. So this is one we have been looking forward to. But before we go into the full content on Liverpool, we'd love to hear a little bit about how you got yourself started out in journalism.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep this brief because it's probably a long story. It's about a decade's worth of story. So yeah, I suppose. So the point at which I initially actually interestingly got I got accepted to Liverpool University of Liverpool to do computer science. I wanted to make computer games when I was younger, and then sort of had a change of heart. I think I'd always loved the journalism. I'd sort of got distracted by the computer science element, and just sort of it came to a head that summer. So sort of completely changed my mind on that. So went down the journalism route instead. I went to John Moore's doing a journalism qualification there, and actually dropped out, which is not something I'd probably give out as advice to anyone to do. Don't follow that path. But the course just wasn't for me. It didn't sort of. I don't know, it felt like it was dragged out, it just protracted, I wasn't really enjoying it, so I ended up dropping out of uni. Like I say, I wouldn't advise doing that to anyone, but after that, I still wanted to follow the journalism route, so I went to Liverpool, the college in the city centre of Liverpool, doing an NCTJ qualification, which is something I think if people are thinking, I maybe don't want to go to uni because of the expense and things like that, the NCTJ, I can't recommend it enough. It was fantastic. It was a short-term course, so I think I did it in 4 or 5 months. And alongside that, I was doing some internship at goal.com, which, you know, I know internships are quite controversial if they're unpaid, which mine was, and probably rightly so, because I think they do exclude some people. But one of the huge benefits of the internship was that you got to attend Premier League matches, which for someone who had never worked in journalism before was incredible. I was covering Liverpool and Everton matches, and getting that on my CV when I was just a young kid, really. So yeah, and that turned into a permanent job. Did that for a while. Next move from there was sort of to the Manchester Evening News, which again sort of got a lucky break there, doing City and United, 2 massive clubs. Absolutely loved that, gained loads of experience. And all while this is going on, and sort of applied for to work for Liverpool FC a couple of times. Obviously, it's the club I support, no secret about that, I don't think. And got turned down a couple of times for that job, which, you know, I wasn't ready for it really. So, you know, I think a blessing at the time really I got rejected a couple of times, and then it came up a third time, went for it, got to the interview process again, and thankfully at the time got it. And that's where a lot of my experiences have come from really, is working at Liverpool, in terms of it's such a good fit for what I do now, building contacts and things like that. So many great experiences there. And then after a while, because I'd had the taste of it before, wanted to go back out to doing more reporting, obviously working for clubs slightly different. So I was looking around for stuff, and I saw an opportunity at the Standard to be their Liverpool reporter, and so I went for that. And obviously with the contacts I've made, the reporting experience I had, it was sort of a perfect fit, and I've absolutely loved it since.
That is, it's extremely interesting, because we've had, you know, journalists definitely work for several organisations before in the past. We've never had someone so heavily, you know, working around the club, you know, a club the size of Liverpool like yourself. So that must have been, you know, extremely valuable to build up that journalistic career. When you worked before at the Manchester Evening News, obviously covering, you know, Manchester United, Manchester City stuff, is there a big contrast, you know, just covering 2 clubs as opposed to 1? Is the workload very different, or was it a similar kind of thing?
Yeah, it's. I think you just got to sort of find that balance in terms of. I don't think the workload's different, because I suppose you're expected to. You can only be expected to churn out so many stories and find so many lines and do so many press conferences or whatever. So at the MEN, it was very much balanced between sort of, do City for a bit. I would go to Manuel Pellegrini's press conferences at the time, or do a bit of Moyes. And yeah, it was a nice. The workload wasn't because it was such a big team of us. I suppose it was quite nicely balanced, but it was good to get experience of those two different clubs and learn what it's like to deal with that and being on one patch where there is two clubs. And but that was a really valuable experience. I mean, Manchester United, absolutely gigantic club, fantastic. Just the history of it all as well, and to be at Old Trafford was phenomenal. And then City, obviously, was such an exciting time for them as well. It wasn't too long after the takeover, and they were still sort of getting used to that and having all these wonderful players. And yeah, it was just two different clubs, but really, really good experience and journalistically just sort of good value in terms of learning so much about, how to go about reporting. And we had so many great colleagues there, Stu Matheson, Stu Brennan, who really sort of guided me and helped me when I was still quite a young journalist. So yeah, that was a great experience. I loved it.
Definitely. And you worked at working as a Liverpool correspondent. What are like the main differences between working with the Evening Standard and actually working within the club of Liverpool itself?
Yeah, so it's everything you'd expect in terms of what you can and can't say, I suppose. Obviously for the club we had to be so measured, never really sort of commenting on the performances and sort of more just letting the players speak for themselves. If they, their thoughts on the performances, the manager's thoughts on the performances, you're never editorializing around it. You've got to be sort of really careful you don't upset anyone. So at the Standard, obviously, it's a completely different relationship. Although to be fair, in the 2 years I've been at the Standard reporting on Liverpool, they've won the European Cup, got 97 Premier League points, and then followed that up with 99 Premier League points and 3 trophies as well. So I haven't had much cause to sort of criticise them, I suppose. But the opportunity to do that is there. I know, recently did a piece on the new Nike deal and sort of maybe the downsides of that. That's obviously something I would never be able to do when I was working at a club. So I think that was the freedom I particularly wanted, to be honest, is to be able to do that, to be able to write more of my opinion and shove it down people's throats, I suppose. The arrogance of that is terrible, isn't it? But yeah, no, I wanted to do more of that and being able to break stories as well, because obviously when you work for the club doing the transfers, it's exciting to be part of that. And but by then the news is already out there. Everyone knows they're just waiting for the announcement. Whereas when we tweet about transfer stories, it's fresh, it's completely out of the blue most of the time. And not just transfers, any sort of breaking news, we tend to be able to deliver that. So I absolutely love that part of it. But they are, very, very different jobs.
And being a Liverpool fan myself, I find it very hard to find a little bit of unbiased. I can be biased when I want to be. Do you find that trouble at all, or when you started reporting, on Liverpool, did you find that problem as well?
I think you're always going to be sympathetic to them, but you've just got to you've got to have that in the back of your mind, that idea that, someone else is going to read this who supports someone else, and are they going to think what you're saying is ridiculous? You can't. I'm sympathetic to Liverpool just because I think, like I say, over these last 2 years, even when they've been beaten, it's been very rare that they've put in a completely terrible performance. Even they've because generally I think under Klopp that's the idea, is they perform 9 times out of 10, and that's why they keep getting the results. So there hasn't been a lot to go at in terms of being critical of them, but it's just you've just got to find that balance, I suppose, and try and think, what would a Manchester United supporter think if they read this tweet or this article? Would they think it's ridiculous? And just sort of have that in the back of your mind, and don't get too drawn into what's being said on forums and some of that stuff, which can be very one-eyed. And I suppose that's absolutely right of supporters to be like that. But in our job, it's obviously very different. You've got to just try and keep that little bit of balance there.
Yeah, and when you're working with the Evening Standard, coming from the club of Liverpool, how closely is your relationship within the club, and how closely do you work within the club still when covering Liverpool?
Yeah, so all the relationships I built up when I was there, I tried to keep on top of, and try and keep on good terms with people. You speak to people at the club, particularly the press office and things, if you're trying to check things out, and speak to them every day. Well, probably most of my working week, so you're constantly in touch with them. And then other people around the club are obviously good sources for stories. So, but a lot of them, to be fair, I made a lot of friends there. So it's not, being cynical and maintaining relationships in that way. It's just purely, I did make friends there. So, you stay in touch with them. But yeah, the main contact really probably in touch with the most is at the press office. And that is a very close relationship. So, the guy who manages that for Liverpool is across that. He's got that relationship with quite a few journalists on the patch. But yeah, that's probably the main one that we lean on from time to time. Yeah.
Now, looking towards the club of Liverpool, there are a lot of characters around the club, and being a journalist can be very entertaining when you've got those characters. I don't know if you have a story or anything that can go with one of these characters, but what has been your best interaction with either one of the managers or one of the players that have been inside the club?
I think I had quite a few from when I worked at the club. You were slightly more withdrawn when you're outside of it, I suppose. So when I worked there, being at the party after we got beat in the Europa League final in Basel, that was a great night. And that's with the players and the manager and all the staff were there, and we'd just been beaten, but you wouldn't have known it from the atmosphere there. It was absolutely crazy. And just another one that sort of sticks out is being sitting on a plane with Jurgen, sitting up next to him to interview him on the way out to Sydney for the post-season friendly in 2017, was it? Just sat there having a beer with him, chatting about the season and doing for a piece that we did. That was just very much a sort of pinch me moment. This is ridiculous. I'm on a private jet with the entire Liverpool squad. I'm sat next to Jurgen Klopp, having a beer, just chatting about football. It's just crazy, really. And then probably the more recent one that stands out, and I only just sort of thought about this last night because I was watching the Barcelona documentary, and they take the ball, pass the ball, and it was talking about a couple of Champions League finals around the Pep era, and it just popped into my head that last season after the Champions League win, I'm stood in the mix zone and all the players and the manager had to snake through there to get out. Now, Jurgen's not under any obligation to stop, obviously, because it's just for the players, that part. He's done his press conference. He's getting off to go to the party. And he walks through the mix zone, walks past all these journalists and sees me and sees Neil Jones and Mel Reddy, and we're together. Obviously knows us. We're around the club all the time. Made a beeline straight over to us. Big clap of the hands, grabbed us for a hug. Because he knows that we're invested in it as well, I suppose. And yeah, to get a Klopp hug after seeing him win the Champions League final is pretty special, really. I sort of almost forgot about that until yesterday. So yeah, that was a mad moment, I suppose. Yeah.
One thing I've sort of just thought off the top of my head is on the field, that's where most of the fans see the Liverpool players and their characters, whereas off the pitch, behind the cameras behind interviews is where we don't necessarily see some of the players. Who would you say, in your time working within the club, was the most surprising player, character wise? Who shone more outside of the cameras and the pitch?
I suppose it's out there more now, but what James Milner's like is sort of, it's probably a bit more of an open secret now, but I think it sort of went under the radar prior to Liverpool. I know certainly looking at it from a Liverpool perspective about just how much of he's so sarcastic, quite really funny, really dry, and all that boring James Milner stuff. So I was initially surprised by that, though. I think he's shown a lot more of his personality since he's been at Liverpool, because he's sort of turned into one of the big characters in the dressing room, which maybe didn't have that role at Manchester City, which had so many stars in it and stuff. So that's one of the ones that surprised me. But one of the things I always think about this squad, and I've said this before, is that it's sort of built in Jurgen Klopp's image. So there's just no egos there. It wouldn't be allowed. Any egos that were there are gone. It's everyone in the squad is a nice person. Even if they're turning you down for an interview in the mix zone, they're very polite about it. They're also just great lads. And I think, that's clearly, as much as he values quality as a footballer, I think, he wants his players to be like that, because I suppose how could you play this style of football? It's all about teamwork and selflessness and running and putting your body on the line if you couldn't, if you weren't that sort of character. And I suppose that's why he's put together such a nice squad of people, really, and human beings.
It is quite humbling to hear, isn't it, when you hear these stories, because it's not until you actually sit down with journalists like yourself and you get to hear all this kind of background information. It's quite humbling to hear these players are nice behind the camera as well. And I mean, I'm a United fan, but even to hear like Klopp and stuff like that is a good guy and everything. It does make you think, there's good people in the sport, so it is really, really interesting to hear. And one thing as well that I think we always find really interesting is asking journalists when they come onto the podcast are some of the highs and the lows of the job, because obviously it can be at times some of the most rewarding work in the world, I'd imagine, but also extremely taxing. It can obviously, I'm sure you've had a lot of late nights, a lot of late night articles being drafted and stuff, but just in your own words, well, what would you say are some of the highs and the lows of the role?
I suppose in terms of the lows, I don't really think. I mean, when I worked for the club, I suppose getting beat in Kiev was really, really disappointing, because we'd been on this journey. I was there. I joined in April 2015, so that would have been, it was just the last few months of Rodgers. So then KLOPP came in and sort of followed all that journey closely with the club, and seeing them lose that League Cup final in the first season, losing the Europa League final in that second season, and then obviously qualifying for the Champions League the season after that was a big, big important boost to the club. And then getting to the Champions League final the season after was something we could never have dreamed of. But then to lose that again, it almost felt like, is this ever going to happen? Like, we've had these 3 final defeats. This is so like gutting. And you see how hard the players work and the manager, and how much it means to everyone. And not just them, it's just what it means to everyone around the club. You've got so many lifelong, passionate Liverpool fans there who want to do the best in everything they do, because this is as close as we would get to playing. And then to have that disappointment then was that's about as low as it gets, is watching a Champions League final in Kiev with your friends and colleagues and having a drink after. So the lows, there's not really that many lows, to be honest. I think it would be, people who do real jobs probably have lows. Doing football journalism, I don't really think you could say that you get any. But the highs, yeah. Being there in Madrid last year was just incredible. Fantastic. The Champions League away trips are phenomenal. Some of the places you get to go, just a few trips sort of stick out from those. I don't know why, I just absolutely loved going to Porto. Brilliant city, go there if you can. Going to Istanbul for the Super Cup, things like that. The highs are obvious, I suppose, and they're all there, and the opportunities we get it's remarkable. And the lows aren't that low, because it's football. I know some football journalists on Twitter are quite cynical and moan about things, but if you're doing that, I think you're in the wrong job, to be honest, because it's just an absolute dream. And I've been doing this for quite a while now, and I'm still not sick of it yet. So anyone who is, I think they should step aside and let someone else have a go.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear. It's definitely something that me and Reece have, one day away. It's definitely something we aspire to, but it's amazing to hear these stories now. And obviously at the moment, every time we hit the summer, it's arguably one of the busiest times to be a football journalist with the transfer window. And it's exciting for the fans like us, being able to hear who's going where and kind of like who's coming into the club. But if we're talking about Liverpool, there's one name which is definitely causing quite a bit of buzz around the Liverpool fan base. And, watching him in recent games and stuff, I can see why now. I wasn't too sure at first, but now I can definitely see why. Thiago from Bayern Munich, recent Champions League winner. David, what can you tell us about that transfer?
Yeah, I watched him on Sunday and I just thought he was absolutely phenomenal. He was man of the match for me. Just his control of the game, didn't misplace a pass, winning it back. I thought, to be honest, he made the goal. That pass he played through the lines completely opened the game, and I think that was the only time it really sort of happened in the match. You look at the person who puts the cross in and the person who scores, but I thought that pass absolutely made the goal because it opened the game up completely. He's a phenomenal footballer, and yeah, I think watching that in particular sort of reminded me that it would be really nice if Liverpool signed him to have the to be able to watch him every week. What a footballer! In terms of Liverpool's interest, as far as I know, and you know, when I last checked with my sources, it's not really moved on significantly. I know press elsewhere is sort of pushing the idea that it's progressing, but I do think a lot of that has been the same sort of line coming out again, is that if Liverpool pay the money, he'll go there. He's more than happy to go to Liverpool. He wants to join Liverpool. Bayern are willing to sell at this amount. It's all up to Liverpool to pay it, and that's, as far as I know, is true. But from Liverpool's perspective, they're saying to me that at the moment it doesn't sort of make sense because they're so well stocked in terms of numbers in midfield. Now, whether that could change, I think for starters, because Gini Wijnaldum may leave. Barcelona are obviously going to sniff around him this summer. If they give an acceptable offer and he thinks it's time to go because he's won everything at Liverpool, I think that would be fair enough for him. I think every Liverpool fan would wish him well. Been an absolute, club legend as far as I'm concerned. Incredible footballer. So if that happened, you could 100% see Liverpool going for Thiago. If not, one other thing that's sort of not been spoken about as much, and when I put this to the club, it was sort of ruled out, but I still think it's something they might think about, is because of the numbers of games this season, in such a tight period, injuries are likely to be more regular, and also Dejan Lovren leaving at centre-half. The real possibility that Fabinho is going to play a lot of games back there because Joel Matip and Joe Gomez do pick up injuries. So, I wonder whether they would possibly consider, maybe this is a possibility to get Thiago in as that extra midfielder if you're going to end up using Fabinho back there more often. That's me speculating on that front. I do think personally that the likelihood is that Wijnaldum would have to leave before Thiago came in. But I still think there's so much noise about it. The Klopp loves him to bits. I just think there's, maybe towards the end of the window they'll just think, let's just do it. Let's get this done, because he's just a phenomenal footballer, and you just don't want to pass up the opportunity to have him in your team. He's just incredible.
That's something that's really interesting. I mean, you don't really think about, because Fabinho won a lot of things with Monaco, playing right back, and you forget how good of a defender he is, playing in the back line, whereas, Liverpool fans are used to him playing in the central defensive midfielder role. If, say, Fabinho stays in the midfield, we have, Gini stay as well, we don't bring in Thiago, who do you think is like a realistic target for Liverpool to get in that central defensive midfield? Not even central defensive midfield, sorry, just central defensive spot.
To be honest, there's been a few names bandied about, but none of them have sort of come back with anyone I've spoken to, sort of just ruled them out. The guy, Isamandi at Real Betis, is someone I can tell that they like from the way they talk about him, but I just don't think it's happening this summer. I think he's someone they're keeping an eye on, with the possibility to get a free transfer next summer, maybe, if he doesn't find a move elsewhere. Other than that, really, it's not really been anyone linked that I think is credible. I've been speaking to Ben White's people, and basically the deal there is that they don't want to sell to Leeds because it's a rival, sort of expected to be a direct rival in terms of relegation next season. But the problem is that I don't think that Liverpool will pay £30 million for someone who's going to be effectively their fourth choice centre half. And also, I don't think it'd be a good move for Ben White. He needs to be playing regularly at his age, and he's shown he's worth that with his performances last season. So, in terms of centre half, I haven't really heard any credible targets, which makes me think that, and certainly if the season started tomorrow, the way it was put to me is that Fabinho would be fourth choice centre half. So I don't think they're going to rush into the market and sign anyone who they think's not going to be right for them. I genuinely think there's a possibility they start the season without bringing in another centre half, which, with the injury record back there, seems sort of mad. But then I think they really do think Fabinho is an option back there, and that is what leads me to think that there's a possibility of the Thiago thing happening without Wijnaldum leaving, just because I just think surely they won't leave themselves short of numbers there. But it's so much up in the air, and I know it's hard. Journalists, I suppose, a lot of the time people expect us to have definitive answers, but there's not even definitive answers from. For example, Thiago doesn't know where he's going to be playing football next season. So if he doesn't know, I don't know either. So it's hard to give definitive answers on stuff if they're not there to be had. The only stuff that's really definitive is around who might leave, who they're willing to sell, who who they're looking at, things like that, they're definitive. But in terms of saying this is what the squad will be next season, it's really difficult.
Well, I mean, it's all to come in the next coming weeks, I guess. You know, it's an exciting time for everyone. So we will have to keep our eyes peeled to the Evening Stand to see if David has any interesting things coming out fairly soon. But David, we just want to say from both me and Reece, thank you so much for being on this week's episode. It's been an absolute pleasure to pick your brain and hear some of these stories.
No, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. That's nice one.
And as always, we will be, of course, leaving David's links in the link below. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also get to us on our streaming services. We're on Spotify, Apple Music Podcast, you know, everywhere you can find your podcasts. You can get a hold of us on Instagram at The Average Pundits, on Twitter at Pundits Average, and you can get a hold of us if you want to come on the podcast at The Average Pundits at outlook.com. And as always, Reece, thank you very much for joining me as well.
It's been an absolute honour to be speaking to David about Liverpool, a club that I love. And one thing that we definitely learned from this podcast, if we didn't know that already, is that we'd love to share a Ribena with James Milner for sure.
Definitely, that's maybe one we can focus on getting him on in the future. But thank you very much for watching, guys, and we will see you next time.